first speaker has warned me that I made a terrible mistake yesterday when I introduced James Gibbs Stewart as an Englishman. James, are you here? Not here yet, he'll be in.
He's coming in with his sword.
He's coming in with his sword. He is a Scotsman. This is serious business over there, really. No, it is. Anyway, so I want to get the next introduction absolutely correct, and this is Mr. Kenneth Palmerton. He is from the island of Jersey, originally, which is, he calls it Old Jersey rather than New Jersey. And they have a money system there, which is very similar, I gather, we're going to find out, to what is discussed as the Guernsey, and he's very upset that we call it an experiment. The Guernsey experiment, which apparently is not regarded as an experiment. Ken Palmerton knows a very great deal about the intricacies of the monetary situation in England, including the nationalization of the bank, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, including a lot of material on Frederick Soddy. And we're very, very privileged to have him here all the way from the UK. And so please welcome Kenneth.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? I don't mind anybody jumping in and asking questions whenever. It won't interrupt me, it won't upset me one little bit, if that's what you would like to do. The great cliche of people addressing a new audience is, I'm delighted to be with you here in Milwaukee. Where are we? but truly, when Stephen announced this conference and he said it was at the Roosevelt University, that I found interesting, because the very beginnings of my journey, which many of you have been down, you know, the road to madness, actually started with me being told that on the desk of Roosevelt when he was president, he had a little notice which said, "Nothing happens by accident." Now, I don't know whether Americans remember this, but I'm hoping that as Americans, you will tell me where the other quotation which helped to start me on my journey is. Somewhere, I believe there is a treasury building, which I was shown many years ago. It's a Greek-type temple, and around the portico it says, "Taxes are the price we pay for our civilization." Well, my journey to madness has taken me to believe that is actually untrue. Because as Stephen said, I come from an island. It's 14 miles off the French coast, 100 miles south of the English south coast, and it's described in official circles as a crown peculiar. Now, because we don't, our head of state, sovereign, is not the Queen of England, it is the Duchess of Normandy. As it happens, it's the same person, but they're wearing a different hat. And you had a man over here called Henry Ford who said all history is bunk. Well, I'm sorry, again, that's something which I don't agree with, because you cannot understand why you have this situation, which is, in legalese terms is called a crown peculiar. You can't understand that without knowing the history. And I hope you'll indulge me and allow me to tell you about what happened 1,300 years ago. Round about that period, we had an explosion of population, which happens to us throughout our history, periodically in various parts of the world, where all of a sudden, for reasons that nobody can quite understand, people decide to up sticks and go and conquer the world. Well, you probably know these people as the Vikings. They were the people from what we now call Scandinavia, from various parts of it, and they are known for rape and pillage, but it's only part of the story, as always. They roved all over the northern hemisphere, certainly. They came down the eastern seaboard of Canada, almost certainly as far as what we now call America. They took over Greenland, they took over Iceland, they took over the Faroe Islands, they then moved farther down south. They took over the Shetland Islands and the Orkney Islands. They tried to have a go at Scotland. They went round the coast, they went and landed and settled in Ireland. They took over what we call now the Isle of Man, which actually has the oldest parliament in the world, the Tynwald. They continued on, they raped and pillaged all the way around England. They took over what is now part of modern France, the province of Normandy, the land of the Norsemen. Continued on, round through Gibraltar, out into the Mediterranean. They went down the Danube to the Black Sea, down and took over Cyprus. They took over Sicily, they took over Malta, they landed in the Levant. But they were actually traders more than anything. Okay, they took what they wanted by force, often, including, oh no, never mind.
Sorry.
I remembered we're in mixed company now, that's all right. Thank you. But they had, right at the core of their understanding, an idea about money. They knew that money shouldn't grow. As they were Christianized, well, sort of, that they gathered this idea that usury, that is, using money to make money, was forbidden to them. And when, if I can take you to one part of this semi-global expansion to Normandy. Now that is a part of the mainland of Europe which they took off the Franks, the Franks' predecessor. But strangely enough, their leader only ever got as high as being a duke. But of course, we're now up to the year 1000. He had eyes on the United Kingdom, the islands of Scotland and Ireland and England, and he even got the Pope to say, yes, William, I'll give you my permission to go and take them. So he did. And the last conquest of England came from Normandy, the land of the Norsemen. Over the centuries, as the British Crown consolidated, they lost the mainland part of Normandy to the Franks again. But what remained was this group of offshore islands, four major ones: Jersey, Guernsey, Orkney and Sark, and that remained as part of Normandy. They retained their right to self-government, so Guernsey has a parliament, Jersey has a parliament, and you'll hear me, if I slip, I will refer to the states. Now, I don't mean the states of America, I mean the states of Guernsey and Jersey. Going on forward, this went on for hundreds of years until about the early 1800s, when there was a political movement in England called the Chartists. And this is where the business about the Guernsey experiment comes in, because they knew about Guernsey. Now, why they didn't know about Jersey, I don't know, but these are questions that we'll never know the answer to. Now, these Chartists had a reform program, much of which we still haven't got, like they wanted annual parliaments, they wanted to be able to recall members of parliament, they wanted an extended franchise, a universal male franchise. Sorry, madam, but that's what they were stupid, like most of us men. Women had to wait until later. And amongst their leadership, there was a banker in Birmingham called Atwood. And he knew what we all talk about. He said that the source of money should be the creation of the state. So these Chartists, it was actually part of their program, although if you go and read up about the Chartists, that is not in most history books about their ideas about money. But for some reason, he discovered what was happening in Guernsey. And this was the time, not long after, in the centre of St. Peterport, which is the capital of Guernsey, they had built themselves a meat market. Now, it happens, in Glasgow, which is the second city in Scotland, they'd done the same, except that theirs was a vegetable market, one in Guernsey was a meat market. And they were comparing it and saying, look at what the people in Guernsey have done, and this is where they call it an experiment, because they didn't know any better, they have built this meat market out of money that the states, I'm reminding myself that you would know this as a parliament, the states had created enough money to build that meat market, and in 5 years, from its revenues, that debt as such has been paid off. That's rather interesting, because these ideas have rumbled on in the United Kingdom for a long, long time. In 1956, when in Glasgow there was a political campaign for what was called rates vouchers. Now rates, I don't know what you call local taxes. Local taxes. Thank you. In the United Kingdom, until very recently, they were called rates. And they're quite a burdensome taxation system. And they were fighting politically on this basis. And they discovered that when they pulled down the Bishopbriggs market, which is that market in Scotland, Edinburgh, Glasgow I'm talking about, they found that they hadn't paid for it. And that was 150 years, hadn't paid for it. And they reminded themselves that Guernsey had done exactly the same thing and paid for it in 5 years. And there was a couple who you probably know called the Grubiaks, Jan and Olive. I never met Jan, but I met Olive not long before she died. She was in a nursing home. And they had written about this, and the pamphlet, the Guernsey experiment, has gone into quite a few editions, and I'm sure most of you here have actually got copies. Guernsey experiment. But what they didn't know was that what had happened in Guernsey was part of a system which was common in the Channel Islands because of their Norse past. Now, I come from Jersey, and where the big problem was, of course, I thought Stephen was insulting me by saying I came from Guernsey. See, I'm trying to think of a parallel here, that there is a deadly rivalry between these two islands. In the English Civil War, Guernsey was parliamentarian, Jersey was royalist. Now, sorry, I know I was on the wrong side, in the wrong island, but never mind. But that carries on. This is now fairly friendly. We only sort of kill each other on the football field once a year now. Persists to this day. So when Stephen asked me and said, you know, I'll introduce you, you're coming from Guernsey, the telephone lines between America and England were burning hot. Because I said, don't insult me. And then, of course, he had me coming from Scotland. Then he had to go at James. So, I'm sorry, you have to keep taking the tablets first.
We were your colony.
Well, I'm glad you remember it. Because it's worse than that. You see, England belongs to Jersey by right of conquest. It was the prefabricated castle. I'm sorry, I'm deviating here. Do you mind? William the Bastard. Sorry, William of Normandy. You got it. Yes. Okay. He brought prefabricated castles over with him, and we're talking about 1066. And they were built actually on the seashore in Jersey. But it's the only remaining part of this Duchy of Normandy. I think so. England belongs to Jersey by right of conquest. Sorry for the deviation. He was describing a system, and I think the easiest way to describe that is that the states do not borrow. They never have borrowed, to my knowledge, except that I'm going to tell you about the situation now, and then you'll think, oh, that's right. But they've never borrowed. Now, if you don't borrow, you don't have to tax very heavily. Because what's the first function of tax? And I gather that it's actually written into the law in the States as well, but in the United Kingdom, the first call on our income taxes is to pay off our national debt. So this business about taxes are the price we pay for our civilization ain't true. Taxes are the price we pay for our national debt. Now, Jersey hasn't got one. And I can remember, well, I can just about remember, I was a very small child, my parents took me somewhere into St Helier, which is the main town in Jersey, and there was a riot going on. And this riot was because income tax had been increased from 4p to 6p in the pound. Now what's 6p now? It's 0.06 of a pound. So it wasn't much. There were no death duties. There were very low, very little company taxes except for services. No sales taxes. We call the value-added tax. I don't know what you call it here. No sales taxes. So the result of their not having a debt was that they didn't need to tax. Right. So the system there was basically that the people would. I'll give you an example. They've just had their Katrina. There's been a huge storm. The seawall's been blown down. The people will go up to the States Parliament, up to the States Building, knock on the door and say, please, we want a new sea wall. And the bureaucrats, the senators would say to them, said to them, well, what do you want a new sea wall for? Well, now, come on, it's washing away the land and the soil. Okay, you have established a need. You need a new sea wall. Have you got the materials? Oh, don't be silly, the island's built of granite, which it is, a rose-coloured granite. If you ever go, it's one thing you'll notice about that. It's a beautiful rose-coloured granite. So we've got the materials, there's no doubt about it. Have we got the labour? Well, last year when we finished the potato harvest, there were men hanging around the corners, when we were for us, wanting to job for an income. So they've established the need, we have the materials, we have the labour, and the idea of them, anybody saying to them, yeah, but we haven't got any money, never occurred to them. Because the states did what every sensible person does when they want money, they created it. Pretty impressive. It was in the form of generally of cash, the rest of the money is a slightly more complicated system but worked in the same manner. That cash was given to the contractors who were responsible for organising building the sea wall. Those contractors paid their material suppliers, they all paid their workers, paid money off to the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker. Then the state's function came into the final stage of it. When that money had done its job, it was withdrawn as taxation at that low sort of level I was talking about, and destroyed. Well, not really, because it was paper and it was malleable. They wanted to print and put it out again sometime. But as far as we're concerned, it was written off the books. So that sea wall had been built and paid for. It was an asset on the books, not a liability. Now, I don't know what your system here in the States, but when we have public housing built in the United Kingdom, mortgages are raised and it's paid over 60 years. So we have council houses which are 60, 70 years old, like the Fisherman's Marsh, it hadn't been paid for. It doesn't happen on the Channel Islands. The public infrastructure is bought and paid for, it's an asset on the books, not a liability. So this is their system, and it's been going on for several hundred years. It's not an experiment, and it's certainly not confined to Guernsey. Now, why we can't get the Parliament in Westminster to do exactly the same thing, I'm as nonplussed about that as you are, because it's perfectly possible. It works. I am told Ken regularly, Ken, don't be stupid. You're talking about a little insignificant group of offshore rocks. Well, that it might be. But you will find the standards of living, you will find the infrastructure, and every bit as sophisticated as you have here in Chicago. I don't know whether that's a compliment. Sorry. But this idea, I gather you built a park here, how many, is it billions of dollars? Which was borrowed? Is that right?
Yes.
It's not paid for. So the bankers really couldn't sort of come with a shovel and pick your park up and say, no, you haven't paid for it, we'll take it away and take it out with us. But it's a perfectly viable system. I can quote you lots of examples around the world where this has been used, but not over a 400-year period. Now can I tell you the bad news? That history lesson, I'm afraid, is coming back up now to 1950. The idea of putting an end to our European tribal wars, and we've had them for several hundred years, was a good idea. I support it fully. and I recognise that there are issues which we have to discuss as a group of nations. We can't do it each in our own capitals. We've got to go somewhere else and discuss things which can only be discussed supranationally. I support that idea, but the first big treaty was the Treaty of Rome in 1950. And the Channel Islands, like every other administration that had power over their own destinies, looked at this and they said, hey, we can't sign up to this. Come on, we're consummate Europeans. You know, we're popping across to France every few minutes. We're trading. It goes on. But they couldn't sign the Treaty of Rome because it demanded that they give up their right to create their own money. And they said, this is a price too far. Now, moving on from 1950, what was happening, of course, is that we had people like Maggie Thatcher. I don't know whether Reagan did the same, but she abandoned exchange controls. She'd been told to. She did it. And of course, what happened is that money then went flowing across borders willy-nilly, and nobody had any legislation to stop it. Well, none of the big trading nations anyway. And certainly the United Kingdom did. So what did the rich people do? It wasn't just the climate they were after. They decamped to the Channel Islands. And since 1960, almost every international monetary business has set up a headquarters or a branch in the Channel Islands. And the rich people go and put their money there to benefit from local levels of taxation. We have now been branded as a tax haven, and I object strongly to this. The Virgin Islands and places like that were set up, their structures, deliberately to evade tax. The Channel Islands never were. It just happens that the tax system was, and I tried to explain to you how it had arrived at that, was beneficial to people with large quantities of money that they didn't want taxing. What that has done, it's totally destroyed the social structures of the island, and what's even worse, when I go back regularly, I'll explain to you how I started on this, because I didn't understand why I couldn't go home to live. You know, I was always told, oh, all the rich people there, so that's why house prices are 10 times, nearly the same as London prices, and I couldn't afford them, so I couldn't go home to live. Rich people went there to protect their capital sums, but that is a result. They destroyed the social structures of the island, and all the youngsters, instead of taking part in their usual occupations, which actually require to work with dirty fingernails, come on, they've got the chance of a nice soft job in an office. So they all decamped almost en masse into the banking and insurance and trades that are set up in both Jersey and Guernsey. It has totally changed the nature of the islands, and when I go back, I cannot find anybody now who remembers why the Channel Islands were different. They don't remember why they had a tax system which was so very low by global standards. The idea that they had no debt, and if you question this, do you use a thing called Whitaker's Almanac in the States? It's a very common, like an encyclopedia which is issued every year, and you can follow the debt figures of every country in this. You will find that there are times when Guernsey and Jersey have, something else I don't understand. They have a positive national debt, which I think is a great idea. But they've never had a national debt that I can find. Now, I would hope that it begs the question, why? But people can't explain why. And in 5 years ago, there was a big report by the European community under the auspices of the Bundesbank, who was saying, we can't have people escaping to these stupid little islands and escaping paying their share of tax. I don't know whether you accept what I said before. The function of tax in our so-called civilized countries is to pay our debt. We can't have people escaping to do that. We've got to stop them. Now, of the two administrations, if you talk about England and the Channel Islands, England is paying, about 40% of gross domestic product in taxation in one form or another. And I've explained to you what the Jersey has never got to more than 20%, and that was only in time of some difficulty. That had to be stopped. Now, they're not telling the Westminster Parliament enact laws to stop people taking money out of the jurisdiction. they turned in the towel and said, you stop doing what you're doing. So the situation now is it looks as though we're going to lose that. And that's a 1,000-year history. I think we've lost it because I can't find people in Jersey to discuss why the system was different. I can talk to you about trade if you wish me to. 300 years ago, Jersey was virtually bare rock. The soil was created by the people, the really productive soil. They laboriously logged seaweed from the seashore, load at a time, backwards and forwards, and they built the soil on which their later substance out of which it was created. Because they discovered, as the population rose, the one thing they hadn't got is that was a source of supply of energy. The Industrial Revolution was coming along, people wanted to raise steam and things like this. They needed coal. They developed the potato industry first, and then the tomato industry. They had an advantage. They could get potatoes to market in England 3 weeks earlier than anybody else. It was an advantage of their climate. So they traded to buy coal. No, for coal. Later they developed the cattle in the island by selective breeding. Prior to the commencement of this, they were a scrawny lot of animals that weren't any good for anybody. But they didn't go for beef, they didn't go for meat. They went for dairy. They went for not for quantity, they went for quality. So they produced a type of cow which gave 14% butter fat content, which is very fatty. Those of you who come from Wisconsin will probably tell me it's a good guy. So this is what they did. They recognized that true trade was in surpluses. In other words, they weren't going to become a monoculture to provide somebody else with something that they couldn't afford to buy themselves, like we did to the West Indies with sugar, like we did to Malaysia with rubber. They had an economy which was self-supporting, and it traded their true surpluses, and they actually developed these trades for this function, although they like tomatoes themselves, to get what they hadn't got. Now, I personally believe that that's a fairly balanced way of dealing with their economy. Now, don't talk to me about their politics, otherwise you'll get steam coming out of my ears, because their political system is crude, it is very backward in my view, but it is based upon the feudal system. It has never really developed. Not until 1946 were any of the functionaries elected. They were all by hereditary acts. If your father was a constable of the parish, you were a constable of the parish. But as I've described to you the state's system, I can't give you an adequate explanation for. I can only tell you that this happened, and there are records which are not complete and in a strange language which I now don't speak, where the parishes, which were administrative units as well as being religious centres, if they had roads that needed repairing in their parish, they issued money. I don't know who allowed them to do that, what statute or anything like that, but clearly they had the authority to it. They issued money, nobody questioned. So if you were, they said, oh Joe, will you come and, you're not doing anything next week, are you? Will you come and mend this bit of road? He was paid in something which he knew he could pass on to somebody else to buy what he wanted. Now there are parish records talking about this all over the place, and there's only one that I know of, but I'm sure that there are others, where there were two brothers up in St John's parish who decided that what they needed in their parish, they needed somewhere to grind corn. I think they were probably having to take it somewhere else. So what they did is they built a mill, a wind mill, to grind corn, and they created money and issued it into their community. And the community, by this money, then had the right to bring their corn to him and have it ground in payment to extinguish their debt. And that money was never questioned, as far as I know. It circulated for whatever need was needed. And the only taxes in the island were when you got to a situation where somebody, I think, said, I think we get, prices are beginning to rise. And I think that's because Joe Bloggs thinks there's more money out there and we should price up and get its price, we'll take some of that money out of circulation. Now, as far as I know, there were no scientific calculations done. I think most of us monetary reformers would like calculations so that we know how much money is required at a particular time. But it did seem to happen, and it did seem to work, because there wasn't any inflation on the islands which wasn't attributable to something that we had to bring in. I think I've exhausted the top skin. Would you like to open? Can I open up the discussion and can we? I'll try and answer questions. Madam.
But you said the parishes issued money. Was that like the actual pounds? Or they would issue a formal pound?
The currency was certainly in the last 150 years a pound. But you see, prior to that, they used anybody's money. The livre tournois, which was a French. You found pieces of 8 in circulation, although they were actually gold. Almost any bit of money, they seem to have this idea that if I can get rid of it, it's perfectly acceptable. So the idea that people can't cope with more than one type of currency, that's nonsense.
Well, suppose we did that and New Orleans decided to issue money.
They have done,
their levy.
historically.
What would they issue though? Could they issue like Federal Reserve notes, U.S. notes?
No, you can't do Federal Reserve,
Or
they're
did
private.
they have their own money that was just used in their own city? Or?
No, in the 19th, we were discussing with Ken. We were discussing with our friend this morning about that in the 1930s, apparently hundreds of American cities set up their own local currencies. And I believe you've returned to it in this country now. You know about local exchange systems? Well, there are 100. At Ithaca in New York City, New York State, Eugene in Oregon, these are two I know about. They have a local currency. I don't know what to call them. The little town where I live in England, we had a thing called a favour, which was a unit of currency. You see, we aren't allowed to call it money in the United Kingdom. The Isle of Wight tried to do that, and the Bank of the Treasury stamped on them. But I don't know what you choose to call it. Call it anything.
Okay, but so it's only, you could only use it among people who would accept it as currency.
Exactly.
And you'd have to have some sort of
Exactly.
agreement among the merchants.
Exactly. See, that's why I support the idea of a common currency throughout Europe. I don't like the idea of a single currency because you're going to blot out the opportunity to do this sort of thing. But a common currency is desirable for high-level trading. But for local trading, why not?
Yeah, when you talk about that, to me it seems like in this room.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Okay.
Steve,
What
I'm
you're saying-
not over mine.
Let's get our about.
Can we get the technology in place?
Test that out, Chris. Is that microphone working now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What's the?
He's got the talking stick.
Okay, what I was saying is like in this room here, if we issued our own money, I don't know if we could, call it token, but we could take, well, if you had English money and we had the American dollar, you had the pound, we could have like a token. And we use the token, I don't know if that's the right way to term it, but we could use that for exchange, but we would each have our own currency. That's kind of what my question is. Like churches sometimes have script money, for a specific project or whatever they're doing. And that's kind of what I think you're saying is different currencies can be used, but they can purchase a certain token or whatever for the specific purpose of a project. Kind of like that. With the euro, is it kind of that way with the countries there that still issue their own money, like the English pound?
Well, if that's your question, the euro is an attempt to impose a single currency on the whole of Europe. And England, the United Kingdom, is one of the places that said, no, we're not having it. So you can go into shops in England, certainly in most of the big towns, and they'll accept euros. But the currency is the pound sterling. But you used an interesting word there. You used the word scrip. Now, I'm sure most people here know that this is the reason why us cousins fell out and why you colonials went your own way, because our parliament, in its wisdom, was persuaded by the usual of the City of London to stop you from using your own script. And the Boston Tea Party was nothing about tea. It was about your right to do things in your way, which I think you have the right to do. And it was called then script. But the business about it is about acceptability. Now, I'm sure the same thing applies in this country, but you can go, for instance, to a city called Sheffield, which I just happen to know about. And in the City Museum, they've got a glass case about as big as that wall, and on it are hundreds of tokens, which is another word you use. And all sorts of people issued tokens in Sheffield, and they did it everywhere else, because they recognised that the money system had failed the people. It hadn't given them enough money to go and buy the product. And all sorts of manufacturers issued a token. Okay, yes, it was abused, and it was abused in the States as well. And we enacted laws to stop people being forced to take tokens instead of wages. They were called truck acts, which have been repealed, of course. But all sorts of people issued tokens to allow somebody who couldn't otherwise produce sterling coins to produce these tokens. And as long as somebody accepted these and said to themselves, I can pass this on. I've just given the person a pair of shoes, but I want to go down the road and buy a cauliflower or a cabbage. And he knows that he can go down the street and he can get a cabbage for what he's been. That is, in my view, is acceptable money. I don't know whether you agree. So,
yes. Good morning. If we did have monetary reform that AMI is suggesting, and we had the government actually printing hard currency rather than banks creating it through the fractional reserve system, would we need to have local currencies? And if we do still need to have local currencies, how would the two interrelate?
I don't honestly know the answer to the question, but can I sort of, can I flammel my way through it? I don't know how we would operate the two, and I think we're back to this business about acceptability. But you used another word. I'm not a libertarian. I'm a British liberal, or a liberal democrat as it now is. I do not actually want government to be the issuing, the person who actually issues our money. I actually don't trust government enough to recognise that politicians won't sort of say, let's put a bit more money in circulation. We don't actually need it, but we want our people to feel better. If you ask me then how, in the United Kingdom, and who was it talking about measurements yesterday? That reminded me that in the United Kingdom, we have an organisation which is a function of the state called the National Physical Laboratory. And they tell us how heavy the pound is in weight, they tell us how long the yard or the metre is in length, and nobody ever argues with them. And I believe that we can establish a function of the state to calculate at any particular time what, somewhere near, exactly how much money we need in circulation. That is not nothing to do with politics. That's a purely mathematical accountancy calculation, which, in my view, should not be interfered with. So, but how that state amount, see, if we had that stable currency of sufficient quantity, I think there would be less need for local communities to create their own money. Because most of the community creation and credit that I've studied are always as a result of crisis. We haven't got enough money in our pocket. We've got the wealth, it's there. The baker is dying to sell us a loaf of bread, and I haven't got any money. Now, that doesn't make any sense, because you can acquire value from somewhere else and have a token which is more convenient than barter to go and take to the baker. So therefore the baker's busy baking his bread, somebody's provided him with the corn, you've got the need because you're hungry. And it may well be that if we get a stable, proper national currency, and you define national which way you like, I believe there will be less need for these other alternatives. But I believe they're a mechanism. And I've always found that they're brought up as a result of some crisis. Is that satisfactory to you? I'm sorry that I can't give you an answer.
You're just saying it's a process.
Yes.
With time.
Well, we will talk about this. We'll talk about this in some other sessions to that particular question.
Okay.
So this may not be the particular
Right time.
moment to do that.
Yeah.
Mr. Palmerton?
Ken,
Ken?
you've got the talking stick.
Yes, I got the talking stick. What you shared about the heritage of your country, where you live,
Yeah.
I was very impressed with. Is that heritage being taught in your educational system today?
You must be joking.
And if it isn't, who is controlling your public education?
Now, come on, please don't ask silly questions. You know
But
the
this is
answer.
our problem, is that we're not being allowed to remember unless we search out this information on our own.
It's how Stephen and I stumbled into each other, because I think we both recognise, and I believe a lot of other people do, an old truism: a people that forget their history are doomed to repeat it.
Who in your nation is setting up the educational program and not allowing this heritage to be taught? We know where it's happening from here in this country.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, I think you're very lucky. See,
We've got 3 generations of misinformation now.
only 3.
3.
Aren't you lucky? Because there might actually still be people alive who remember. See, the problem, this business about syllabus is important. I can't answer your question because I don't know. But remember, I'm a conspiracy theorist. Everybody tells me so. Now, I can guess like the best of you.
I consider that a badge of honor.
Me too. Why I would not allow Stephen to describe me as an expert. I'm not. I'm only a specialist.
Yeah, sure.
Beware of experts.
Especially doctor experts.
Well,
Who are you looking at?
there are experts and there are experts. You know, you have to distinguish, that's all.
But I'm
It's
sorry I
judgment.
can't answer your question. Again, a question I can't answer. But I don't know whether there is an answer. You can believe what you wish about who and why and what. But our youngsters are not being taught about this. Our syllabus is now so narrow. And as I say, for the last 10 years at least, when I go back regularly to Jersey, naturally I talk to people. This bloke's surprised because as soon as I got into the taxi in Chicago, there was somebody who wants to come and meet him. And then come down here and there's 2 more people, only because you talk to people. And I talk to people in Jersey and they look at me, yeah, of course all these friends that come to Jersey, it's a good thing for the island. And I sort of look at them and think, well, but do you know what you've lost? You had control over your own destiny in a manner which most people in this world would give their right arm for. No debt. What would you give to live in a nation of no debt? What would you do with it? I'm sure you'll tell me.
Kenneth, do they have, I have a question, do these
Is
kids,
he allowed? Yes, Steve.
do these kids have a book or and you say you're not an expert, but you know you are an expert, and
No,
when can we expect this book?
There's a man in this country called Tom Greco. I don't know if anyone knows him. He is constantly badgering his head. Ken, this one's writing up, because all these little bits of information, you'll find bits here, bits there, and lots of bits which aren't anywhere. Unfortunately, they're inside my head. And he said, "You've got to write a book. I don't want to write a bloody book. I've got a room full of books on this subject. And what have they achieved? But if I must, then I must."
Yeah, and a room full is not the same as one good book that summarizes the whole thing.
We've got several of them going over several hundred years, Stephen.
We need a book like that, and you seem like the person to write it.
I want it on your website. I've been told how to go out here.
I'll put it. You know, the American Monetary Institute is not promote local currencies, but I don't consider that a local currency.
Neither do I.
See,
For us, it's a national currency.
It's a national currency, which is, Ken and I have discussed this, and he told me he's for
We
local
fight about
currency.
that.
And there's a reputation for local currencies in America that is not, it really does not exist. In fact, there are just 2, as far as I know, there's only the one that you mentioned in Ithaca, and I've heard about the one in Eugene, but I haven't seen anything
There's lots in Canada.
about that. Well, I think you have to actually look. Now, the one in Ithaca has created a total of $95,000. That's it.
That's it,
The
circulating
last
medium
time-
exchange.
The last time I looked.
Yes.
And I tried to get the fellow who...
John
was it
Glover?
Paul Glover. I think
Paul
his
Glover.
name, to come and talk at the last conference, and we just didn't get calls returned. We're always looking for somebody on that. But it's being put forward here, and the reason you think there's a lot of them is that it's being stated as though there are a lot of them, and they just aren't.
Well, in the
We'll always
1930s
look
there were hundreds. You remember Irving Fisher here in Chicago?
Well,
he fostered the
Those
whole
were,
movement.
those were the scripts after the Depression.
That's right.
Yeah, I would put that in a different type of
think?
category. Yeah, because
Okay.
they're,
Well,
where
you
are
know-
they? Where
you know
are
better than I
they?
do.
But we're always looking for that, for someone to come and speak on that. We did have someone who's going to do that this year.
Have you never had
He,
an indigenous
Castle.
Indian come to talk to you about wampum?
An Indian on one?
Yeah. Have you never had the people from Maryland and the East Coast talking to you about tobacco money?
Well, we know about that, and it's in some of the talk. Of course, it's in the book. But the way I think we can do that at a different time,
Yeah.
because we talk about the problems with those monies. I wanted to tell this one story. I knew that Ken liked local currencies to some extent, and it's just out of our. We're concerned with fixing the national problem because that's the key. And I tried to get an analogy of what the difference of this. And I said, you can see how big Ken is. And the question about fixing the national currency is very simple. Stand up, thank you. Our national currency is a mess. It's been privatized. It's been taken from the nation. It's been taken over and used for private purposes and not being used for the national good, which is its main purpose, or the biggest thing it could be doing. And it's as though someone were to come over and, someone comes over and they stand on your foot. That's what's being done to us with our national currency. Okay, I'm standing on your foot. Now, are you going to go off somewhere and try to start a local currency, or are you going to give me a good slap?
I've already caused my trouble here. but can anybody here? I actually came here to try and learn something. Sorry about that. But can anybody here tell me about what actually happened with the Bond brothers in Texas? Do you remember there were these two brothers who tried to corner the silver market? Well, the story we got over there was that what these blokes were up to is that they wanted to take Texas and they succeed, because I gather Texas is a treaty state, and they wanted to secede, and they wanted the silver to create a monetary system for Texas. Now, can anybody, am I talking nonsense about that? Did we get the story wrong?
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
I could talk to you about that more than one hour.
Yeah, but we see this is an example. You're talking about Texas, I believe, is a bit like Yorkshire. They think they're different to anybody else. They're the biggest state, they're Texas. We don't need you.
It's hard to get information from England on some of these things. It's hard to get it here.
You mean like the nationalisation of the Bank of England?
With those brothers, it was a question they tried to control the silver market.
But why?
To make
Other than
money.
greed.
Greed.
Only greed?
They cornered the
Oh,
market.
that's a shame.
They cornered the market and
Tried to.
and they were acting. They had the silver market. The market makers were in. I know it was on the exchange. They were in debt $6 billion, or they were down $6 or $7 or $8 billion dollars. And the exchange came to the Hunt brothers and they said, "Look, you can't do this." Because the Hunt brothers just kept taking delivery for silver, and normally you don't take delivery. So all the market makers and the people in the pit were down $6 billion. They were going to be out of business and dead. And the exchange tried to make a deal with the Hunts, and the Hunts were just pigs about the whole thing. They said, "No, we signed this and you signed that, and you have to pay up." And then the exchange said, "Well, did you read the contract?" And when you read the contract,
You found yourself in the army.
They simply said we can change the rules. That's in the contract.
But we got the story over the
So
other side of the
they
pond.
changed the rules, and only allowed sales to some degree. I don't have exactly how that worked. And the market just plunged, and the Hunts lost their $6 billion in profit.
Plus.
Every that they had.
But we
And
got
they
the
went
story
bankrupt.
that
So-
there was an altruistic reason, and that behind it they agreed there was a reason why they wanted to do it. Thank you, Tony.
I'll get back to what Steve said before about national currency is very important. The counterpart to Guernsey and Jersey making their own money are the famous offshore banking centers of Panama and Liberia. Their distinguishing feature is they have no national currency of their own, and they're anti-states. They use the U.S. dollar, as you know, and because they don't have their currency, they were used first by the main oil companies, international oil majors, and then by the mining companies, and then is a general tax evasion precisely because of the absence of nationhood. The argument that you're bringing up about the common market is raging right now in the former Soviet states that are now faced with joining the euro.
Yes.
Their hands are completely tied. In the Baltic states, for instance, in Latvia, where I teach, there's zero property tax, a 65% flat tax on labor. The only labor that can be employed is employed in the banking sector for money laundering from Russia. The United States won't accept Latvian bank. I mean, it's a completely, the same thing has happened in the Baltic states that you described in your island. And yet they're ideologically so terrified of issuing their own currency and wanting to join the European community, that they believe that it's either the European community and bankers deflation or back to Stalinist Russia.
Well, I'm here, Michael, to tell people that there are historical alternatives. And as a Channel Islander, we object very strongly to being lumped in with places like, say, Panama, whose system was set up deliberately to be tax evasion. The Channel Islands were not set up for that. It just happened that people discovered that they could take advantage of them like this, and it's destroying our islands. But you're right about these people talking about how do we create a national currency. But you see, the Treaty of Rome and the Treaty of Maastricht, which came after it, forbid them to do this.
That's exactly right. That's why you have to write the book. I think Steve's right. It has to be done in a...
Will you help me, please, Michael?
Sure, I'll be glad to. I'll help you.
Now, you heard that? You are my witness.
We're going to move on now, and we will have a panel at the end, and you can ask that question at that point. Thank you very much. And